A massive agricultural surplus is usually a monarch's greatest blessing. For King Chandraban, an unusually high crop yield meant he could pay his imperial taxes far ahead of schedule, filling his treasuries and securing his standing. But Chandraban suffered from a severe vulnerability. He possessed an incredibly fragile ego, one that demanded constant, uninterrupted validation from his inner circle. When his chief minister, Japata, dared to correct the king over a minor triviality about a flower, that ego shattered. Chandraban instantly banished his most capable advisor, swearing a petty oath that he would not look upon Japata's face for 3 full months. By silencing the only man in his court willing to speak blunt truths, the king isolated himself in an echo chamber of yes-men. And he did this at the exact moment a massive political threat was forming. In the imperial capital, Chandraban's early tax payment backfired, triggering deep jealousy in the emperor's wazir. The wazir drafted an official mandate cloaked as a royal whim. He demanded that Chandraban manufacture the darkness of night during the middle of the day directly inside the emperor's palace. The conditions were incredibly strict. The task had to be completed at virtually zero cost. If Chandraban failed, he would face a fine of 5,000 gold coins, the seizure of 500 bighas of his land, and 5 weeks in a prison cell. The wazir designed this mandate as a bureaucratic guillotine, with parameters physically and economically engineered to ensure failure. Facing financial ruin and imprisonment, Chandraban turned to his court for a solution. But with his only critical thinker banished, he was left relying on sycophants who possessed absolutely no capacity for lateral thinking. The king's remaining advisors immediately resorted to brute force logistics. Their first proposal was to construct a massive custom-made canvas tent to completely shroud the emperor's palace. This chart shows the kingdom's total treasury reserves mapped against the raw materials required for the tent. The expense of draping an entire palace complex surges past the kingdom's limit almost instantly, violating the core parameter that the task must cost nothing. Moving down the chain of bad ideas, the army commander suggested uprooting hundreds of giant, mature banyan trees from the forest and replanting them in a tight perimeter around the palace walls. Even if they managed the impossible logistics of moving an entire forest, this hypothesis failed basic geometry. The trees would shade the sidewalls, but the expansive palace roof would remain completely exposed to the midday sun. Every physical, earthbound solution required resources the king didn't have to solve an impossible problem. Conventional engineering is entirely useless when the rules of the game are rigged. Seeing the impending collapse of the kingdom, the queen bypassed her husband entirely and summoned the banished Japatata. To honor the king's petty oath of never looking upon his face, Japatata simply arrived wearing a burqa. Once briefed on the emperor's impossible demand, Japatata immediately recognized the trap. Trying to physically block the sun using materials on the ground was a mathematical dead end, so he abandoned architectural logistics completely. Instead of talking to builders or generals, Japatata went straight to the royal astrologer and opened the celestial almanac. Scanning the charts, he found a massive piece of leverage. The astronomical data predicted a total solar eclipse scheduled for the exact date of their deadline, peaking precisely at 10:15 in the morning. Japatata bypassed physical construction entirely, substituting an impossible financial burden with a free, predictable mechanism of the universe. On the morning of the 22nd, King Chandraban and Japata walked directly into the emperor's court in Agra, empty-handed. The wazir and the emperor sat in arrogant anticipation. Seeing no construction materials and no trees, they readied the royal guards to arrest the king and seize his lands. Then, the clock hit exactly 10:15 a.m. The temperature dropped, shadows warped, and the massive imperial court was rapidly swallowed by complete and utter darkness. the total solar eclipse achieved exactly what was demanded. It blanketed the entire estate in the darkness of night during the middle of the day, and it cost the king absolutely zero. The bureaucratic snare evaporated instantly. The emperor was left speechless by the scale of the loophole, and the wazir was thoroughly humiliated by the strict enforcement of his own rigged rules. The political fallout was swift. The emperor dismissed his jealous wazir in disgrace, while King Chandraban gladly reinstated Japata, doubling his minister's salary on the spot. True intellectual dominance comes from widening your perspective and using the undeniable mechanics of reality to render an opponent's trap irrelevant.